it's going forward anyway. Is this the program all over Europe?
Yes, what they call the grip of state control is to be replaced by the grip of financial control. In other words, the grip of control by elected democracy is to be replaced by the grip of bankers and creditors who are immune from people's voting and can do whatever they want. So what do you think is a tighter grip? That of elected government representatives or that of unelected bankers in Wall Street saying, we want to take whatever you have, pay us or else, your money or your life? That's the choice that they're given, and that's what they're told to do by the World Bank and the IMF as arms of the U.S. Treasury.
So then is this the program all over Europe?
Yes, that's the program. That's why some money managers in Europe and America are engaging in a capital flight out of their own economies. They're putting their money into the BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, Singapore, countries that don't stand for this nonsense. So there's a capital flight out of Europe, out of North America, at the same time this is happening. So the financial managers themselves know that this won't work, but they say, well, we're going to grab as much as we can for as long as we can. Why not?
Well, it's a self-destructive policy then, right?
It's destructive of the countries that follow it, but the bankers think, well, we're going to end up, as the new power elites, we're going to end up owning the world. It's demographically destructive because poverty means that people get sicker. It means they die quicker. It means they can't afford to get an education. It means productivity goes down. It means just a huge waste.
In Wisconsin, which you mentioned a little bit earlier, Governor Walker is attempting to destroy collective bargaining, a basic right of working people. What are the implications of this effort on the part of the state government? Is this effort going to be tried across the country, depending upon how it turns out in Wisconsin?
Well, it's already been tried in a number of states like Ohio. But the most important thing in Wisconsin isn't simply the collective bargaining. Of course, they want to get rid of collective bargaining so that they can dictate lower salaries. But the main thing in Wisconsin, the bill that tries to abolish collective bargaining is 133 pages long, and the key parts of it are the privatization parts. The governor gets to sell off electric utilities, power utilities, whatever assets he wants to whatever price he wants to his campaign contributors or whoever he wants to. So he could sell his main backers, the Koch brothers, say an electric company for $1 and saying it's in the public interest, private enterprise is better. After all, that's what they did in Russia. So you could have all of Wisconsin's, all of the public utilities and streets and roads and schools that have been built up over the last century, and the land, the forests, the beachfront, all just sold off for $1 or $2 to whoever he wants. Essentially, it would be the biggest asset grab since the railway land grants of the mid-19th century.
In that regard, you've just recently written a short piece about some of the privatization grabs in different countries. You told a startling story about New Zealand and other places. Could you mention a few of those?
Well, there are a number of books about New Zealand. Again, the Labour Party in New Zealand, as in Australia, were the ultra-right-wing Thatcherite party. And they've tried to sell off everything they could throughout the country, essentially at giveaways. For instance, they privatized the electric utility, saying that it would be more efficient to have it in private hands. But the first thing the new buyers did was they said, well, we want to increase profits by cutting costs. So we don't need to hire repairmen or fix-it men in case anything goes wrong. And so they fired them all, and most of these people couldn't find work in New Zealand, so they left the country. And then things began to break down and go wrong, and there were no repairs. And Auckland, the capital, was without electricity for months on end, just causing a devastation of New Zealand business. So the New Zealand economy is basically killed. It's dead, it's been privatized and carved up and been left an empty shell. And the Labour Party is convinced still that this is more efficient. The New Zealanders are so stupid that they really believe that dying quickly in the dark is the way to help the world develop, because they're told this helps create wealth, Alan Greenspan style, for the financial sector, and the country committed mass suicide.
When did they privatize the electricity in Auckland?
A few years ago, but they've been doing it since about 1990. I think Douglas came in as the privatizer there and just began selling off everything he could, much more even than Margaret Thatcher did in London. And Pluto Press published a good book on that a few years ago. And people don't usually talk much about New Zealand, but it's in just as bad a condition as the Baltic countries.
What do you mean in terms of what has been privatized in New Zealand?
Causing just mass economic breakdown. They've sold off the water systems, the sewage system. Basically, nothing works. It's like London used to be.
Well, so then how long has this privatization scheme been going on in New Zealand?
Since about 1990, there were a number of books written about it in the 1990s. I know Pluto Press published one. And it's just been an overall disaster. And it gets worse and worse, and the New Zealanders keep saying they want to privatize yet more. They're told that, yes, things are worse because you didn't privatize enough, you're not poor enough. So the New Zealanders are saying, okay, we'll sell off even more of the state, we'll get even poorer, we'll lower our living standards, sell them more. Will that help? And of course it doesn't help. It just declines and declines and declines.
How bad of shape is New Zealand in? What would you compare it to in another country?
To the Baltics, to Latvia and other countries where a lot of skilled labor is emigrating.
Really? You're kidding. It actually compares with the Baltics?
Well, I've never been to New Zealand, but I've been to Australia, and I meet New Zealanders here, I meet New Zealanders in Australia. They've all told me they have to leave because there's no work in Australia. There's no education. There's no hope for their children. There's only worse and worse poverty. And essentially, the government has told them, drop dead or move, because we're selling off the country and there's no room for New Zealanders to live in the country. Essentially, it's like in Scotland when they evicted the tenants to put sheep on the land. They want to use New Zealand for the sheep to grow wool, and they're telling the people, get off our land. It's ours now, and we want to grow sheep on it. We have no need at all for people.
Is the government in New Zealand presently a right-wing government?
Yes, it's the Labour Social Democratic Party.
I see. Because not that long ago, several years ago, I thought they had a more liberal government, didn't they?
Liberal today, they call themselves liberal. Liberal means privatization and the right wing. It's just the opposite of what liberalism used to mean. Liberalism in the 19th century meant freedom from unearned income, freedom from land rent, from monopoly rent, and from privatization of banking. Liberal meant that the government was supposed to take the lead, and that was what all of classical economics is all about. They wanted to tax away the land rent, the economics of Henry George and all that, or they wanted to nationalize the land and the monopolies. But today, liberalism means abolish the government and turn all the power over to monopolies. Instead of making money by profits, by employing labor to sell it at a markup, the products, they don't really care about industrial capital investment or employing labor or expanding production or expanding markets. It's simply an asset grab. Let's just take over the assets and get the people out of there.
So would you say that regardless of what party has been in power in New Zealand over the last decade or so, it's been the same type of neoliberal policy?
That's exactly correct.
I see. Some commentators have pointed out that the three major outbreaks of North African unrest Tunisia, Egypt, and Libya, which have toppled 2 dictators and are threatening a third, occurred in 3 countries singled out for praise by the IMF as success stories of free market restructuring, including large-scale privatization, scaling back of national economic and financial regulation, and massive job and social spending cuts. Do you agree that the revolts in North Africa are most fundamentally uprisings against the neoliberal free market pushed globally by the U.S. and allied financial powers?
Well, certainly labor unions have taken a much stronger role, especially in Tunisia, than has been talked about in most of the papers. The problem is that these countries were educating a lot of people. Basically, this is a bourgeois revolution, not a lower class revolution. A lot of people were educated, sent to college, and then there's no work for them because the economies have been neoliberalized, and there's not much work in neoliberalized economies. So needless to say, there was a lot of anger at the government, but it was also just a reaction against the dictatorships that the Americans have been putting in power. The IMF and the World Bank and the U.S. State Department praised these countries basically because they followed U.S. policies. And the U.S. policies were let foreigners take as much of your raw materials as possible. And dictators are pretty good at controlling populations and keeping them quiet. So they did keep their populations quiet for decades. And I'm told in Tunisia, for instance, that families all sort of suffered quietly, not really. They were afraid to talk to each other about how bad things were. And once all of a sudden there was a spontaneous just sort of uprising against the dictator there, all of a sudden people began to talk to each other and they found out what the neighbors thought. Many of them didn't even know their neighbors' names before. And one of our faculty members, University of Missouri at Kansas City, said now the neighbors even know when each other's birthdays are. Suddenly it brought each other together, and they just decided that they were tired of being afraid. And that's how revolutions occur. People all of a sudden decide they're tired of being afraid, and they thought, what's the point of living in such abject poverty? If this or nothing, then we have nothing more to lose. We're as far down as we can be. We might as well fight back. And they began to fight back, and it just spread because there was just such a latent anger throughout the country, that what the American State Department, Hillary and her right-wing gang, thought was the success of Mubarak in keeping people quiet, actually was just suppressing an enormous pressure that simply exploded.
I'm speaking with financial economist and historian Dr. Michael Hudson. Today's show, The View from Europe. I'm Bonnie Faulkner. This is Guns and Butter. What impact would such increases have on the prices of other commodities, such as food? Won't such price increases likely cause even greater social unrest? What parts of the world are most likely to see these results? Even China could be destabilized by social unrest, could it not?
I don't think so. I don't sense any destabilization there at all. A lot of commodity funds are starting to invest in commodities. And when you have billion-dollar hedge funds coming in, they can bid up the price of commodities or drive them down in the same kind of zigzagging pattern that you have in foreign currencies or stocks and bonds. So I think once you have political instability in oil or in raw materials, you have an opportunity for hedge funds to come in and manipulate the financial price on forward trading, on derivatives. And so it's much more financially driven than it is politically driven at the present time.
Well, right, with the speculation, of course, but oil prices and commodity prices are rising.
They're rising partly because of an enormous amount of money going into Wall Street hedge funds and raw materials investment funds, commodity funds, that are driving it up. Normally, this is a new source of demand. The demand for raw materials is not by people to use them. and the demand for food is not by people that eat, is a demand by hedge funds and financial speculators to drive up the price and monopolize it.
I see. So you see these price increases basically as a result of speculation?
Yes.
Okay. Criminals like Angelo Mozillo of Countrywide Financial are going off scot-free. The Justice Department has dropped its investigation of Mozillo, saying his activities did not amount to criminal wrongdoing. All he did was pocket over $500 million between 2000